he stood accused, his eyes wide with a desperate, unwavering truth that no one seemed willing to see. The whispers followed him everywhere, branding him with a scarlet L4 liar, a mark more painful than any physical wound. Every step he took, every glance he met, was met with suspicion, with a dismissive shake of the head. His own family, once his staunchest allies, now looked at him with a heartbreaking blend of pity and doubt. Can you imagine that? To have your entire world turn against you, to be stripped of your reputation, your credibility, all while knowing, deep down in your bones, that you were right. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a complete, devastating character assassination. They said he fabricated the whole thing, that his story was too outlandish, too impossible to be true. The evidence, they claimed, was against him, meticulously stacked high, brick by painful brick. But what if the evidence was wrong? What if the truth was buried so deep, so carefully concealed, that it would take years, perhaps even a lifetime, to unearth it? This is the story of a man silenced by skepticism, broken by accusations, yet holding on to a sliver of hope that one day the real story would finally, inevitably, come to light. His name was Thomas, a quiet man who had always lived by a simple code of honesty and hard work. He was the kind of person who'd returned a lost wallet with every penny intact, the kind who'd spend hours helping a neighbor without a second thought. So, when Thomas first spoke of what he'd witnessed, people listened. Initially, they listened, as he described the hushed conversations, the furtive movements under the cloak of night, the strange, almost ritualistic behavior he'd stumbled upon. He spoke of hushed whispers and dark figures, of something deeply unsettling taking place right under the nose of their peaceful community. But then, as his narrative grew more detailed, more insistent, a subtle shift occurred. Doubts began to creep in, first as murmurs, then as open accusations. The local authorities, after a perfunctory investigation, dismissed his claims as the ramblings of an overactive imagination, perhaps even a cry for attention. His friends started avoiding, his calls uncomfortable with the intensity of his conviction. His wife Sarah tried to be supportive, but even she eventually couldn't mask the exhaustion in her eyes, the strain in her voice, as Thomas recounted his story for the 100th time. Each retelling met with the same wall of disbelief. The incident that sparked it all happened late one autumn night. Thomas, an insomniac, had been out for one of his usual midnight walks, seeking the quiet solace of the moonlit streets. He lived on the outskirts of town, near an old, rarely used path that wound through a dense patch of woods. It was there, amidst the rustling leaves and the hoot of an owl, that he saw them. Not clearly at first, just shadows moving, a glint of something metallic, and then a hushed conversation that carried on the crisp night air. He froze, hidden by the thick underbrush, and listened. What he overheard was fragmented, unsettling. References to the exchange, the package, and a name, whispered with a chilling reverence that made his blood run cold. It was a name he recognized, a prominent figure in their small town, someone above suspicion. When he tried to report it, to piece together the fragments into a coherent picture for the police, he was met with polite skepticism. "Mr. Davies, are you sure about what you saw?" It was dark, after all. The implication hung heavy in the air. He was mistaken, perhaps delusional. The more Thomas insisted, the more isolated he became. The town, once a place of comfort and familiarity, transformed into a landscape of suspicion and judgment. Children pointed, adults averted their gaze. His business, a small but reputable carpentry shop, began to suffer as customers, influenced by the pervasive gossip, took their custom elsewhere. His financial stability crumbled, and with it, a piece of his dignity. Sarah, bless her heart, held on for as long as she could, but the constant pressure, the societal ostracization, eventually took its toll. Their once happy home became a battleground of strained silences and hushed arguments. "Just let it go, Thomas," she'd plead, tears in her eyes. "It's destroying us." But Thomas couldn't let it go. How could he, when he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he was telling the truth? The weight of that untold truth became a physical burden, a constant ache in his chest. He spent his days replaying the night's events, searching for more details, for anything that would validate his claims. He wrote letters, made phone calls, consulted with anyone who would listen, but the door remained stubbornly shut. The man he had named, the respected pillar of the community, continued to thrive, seemingly untouched by the whispers of Thomas's lies. It was as if Thomas existed in a different reality, one where the truth was glaringly obvious yet invisible to everyone else. The years passed, marked by his persistent, solitary quest. He became known as that eccentric old man who sees things, a tragic figure to some, a public nuisance to others. But then, decades later, a small, unassuming box was discovered in an old attic, tucked away in the forgotten corners of a forgotten past. And what was inside would not only rewrite Thomas's story but shatter the foundations of everything the town believed to be true. The discovery of that unassuming box wasn't an immediate revelation for the town. It was more of a slow burn, a flicker of light in a long darkened room. The attic belonging to the recently deceased Mrs. Eleanor Vance was being cleared out by her distant niece, Clara. Mrs. Vance had been a recluse in her later years, a kindly but quiet woman known for her love of gardening and her disdain for modern technology. Clara, a meticulous archivist by nature, was sifting through decades of forgotten treasures and mundane clutter when she found it, a small wooden chest bound with a rusted clasp, tucked behind an old steamer trunk. Inside, nestled amongst brittle lace doilies and faded photographs, was a collection of meticulously kept journals and a stack of old newspaper clippings. Yellowed with age, Clara, initially bored by the prospect of reading someone else's diary, almost put them aside, but a single phrase scrawled across the first page of the top journal caught her eye. The truth will out. Even from the darkest shadows, intrigued, she began to read. What unfolded within those pages was Mrs. Vance's secret life, a life lived in parallel to the quiet existence the town knew. Eleanor had been a keen observer, a silent witness to many of the town's hidden currents, and as Clara delved deeper, a name began to appear with unsettling frequency: Thomas Davies. Not as the liar the town had branded him, but as a man of unwavering integrity. A man who saw something nobody else wanted to acknowledge. Eleanor's journals detailed her own observations, snippets that corroborated Thomas's outlandish claims. She wrote about seeing the same prominent figure Thomas had named, Mr. Harrison, meeting with unsavory characters late at night, in places no respectable citizen would frequent. She described the same type of vehicle Thomas had mentioned, the same odd mannerisms. Eleanor, being a discreet woman, had never approached Thomas directly. Perhaps she feared being dismissed like he was, or perhaps she simply observed from afar, meticulously recording everything she saw and heard, believing that one day these fragmented pieces would form a complete picture. Her entries weren't grand revelations, but small, consistent details that, when pieced together, painted a chilling mosaic. The newspaper clippings, carefully preserved within the chest, added another layer to the emerging narrative. There were articles about local land deals, about certain businesses expanding unexpectedly quickly, and even a small, almost overlooked report about a missing person case from years ago, a young man who had mysteriously disappeared from the very same area Thomas had been walking that fateful night. Eleanor had underlined specific dates and names in these clippings, drawing lines to her own cryptic notes in the margins of her journals. It was as if she had been connecting the dots all along, seeing a pattern that no one else was willing to see, a pattern that pointed to something far more sinister than petty gossip. Clara felt a growing sense of unease as she read. This wasn't just old family history. This was a historical record of a community's blind spot, a testament to a man's ruined life. The details in the journals aligned too perfectly with the lies Thomas had been accused of spreading. The dates, the locations, the descriptions of the individuals involved, it was all there, independently verified by a woman who had no reason to fabricate such a story. The sheer volume of evidence, meticulously compiled over years, was overwhelming. It wasn't just Thomas's word against the town's anymore. It was Thomas's word, backed by the unwavering, silent testimony of Eleanor Vance. The question that now gnawed at Clara was, why hadn't Eleanor come forward sooner? Why had she kept this vital information hidden for so long, allowing Thomas to suffer in isolation? The answer, she feared, lay somewhere deeper in the journals, a secret still waiting to be uncovered, a truth that might have been too dangerous to reveal in its own time. The more Clara read, the more she realized that Thomas's story wasn't just about being called a liar. It was about a deeply buried secret that had permeated the very fabric of their seemingly idyllic town. Clara's mind reeled as she continued to read, the weight of Eleanor's hidden life pressing down on her. The more she understood the depth of Thomas's suffering, the more enraged she became by the town's collective blindness. But the journals also revealed Eleanor's own complex reasons for staying silent. It wasn't fear of being dismissed like Thomas. It was something far more insidious. Eleanor had witnessed firsthand the influence and power wielded by Mr. Harrison, the very man Thomas had accused. Harrison wasn't just a prominent figure. He was the town's unofficial kingpin, his fingers in every major business, his generosity masking a network of favors and unspoken threats. Eleanor had documented instances of subtle intimidation, of people who dared to cross Harrison suddenly losing their livelihoods, or facing unexplained accidents. She herself, a quiet widow with limited resources, understood the precariety of her position. To speak out would have meant not just social ostracization but potentially dire consequences for her safety, and even the safety of others she cared about. One particularly harrowing entry described a local journalist, a young man named Mark, who had started asking too many questions about some of Harrison's land acquisitions. Eleanor noted how Mark's articles, initially probing and incisive, suddenly became tame, then stopped altogether. Weeks later, Mark abruptly left town, citing personal reasons. But Eleanor's journal hinted at a darker truth, a quiet coercion that had forced him into silence. This wasn't just about reputation. It was about control and the chilling reality of how far some people would go to protect their secrets. Eleanor's entries painted a picture of a town under a veiled reign, where the truth was a dangerous commodity. Clara also discovered a series of coded messages hidden within seemingly innocuous recipes and gardening tips. These weren't elaborate ciphers, but simple substitutions that, once deciphered, revealed discrete meeting times and locations, always involving Mr. Harrison and a rotating cast of unfamiliar faces. Eleanor, it seemed, had been tracking a network of illicit dealings, not just land, but other packages being exchanged, always under the cover of darkness. The descriptions were vague enough to avoid direct accusation in case the journals fell into the wrong hands, but detailed enough to confirm Thomas's initial observations. The missing person mentioned in the newspaper clipping also reappeared in Eleanor's notes, hinting that the young man whose disappearance had been officially ruled an accident might have stumbled upon Harrison's activities, just like Thomas had. Eleanor's theory, chillingly plausible, was that the young man had paid the ultimate price for his accidental discovery. As Clara continued to read, a new character emerged from the periphery of Eleanor's observations, a gruff, seemingly harmless, old fisherman named Silas. Silas, it turned out, was another reluctant witness, having seen some of the same suspicious activities from his boat out on the lake. Unlike Eleanor, Silas was more direct, having attempted to voice his concerns to the local sheriff years ago, only to be met with the same dismissive attitude Thomas had faced. But Silas, a man of quiet conviction, hadn't given up entirely. Eleanor's journals indicated that she and Silas had at one point exchanged subtle signals, a silent pact of shared knowledge, each recognizing in the other someone who saw what others refused to. However, their collaboration had remained purely observational, born of caution rather than proactive pursuit. Due to the palpable fear of repercussions, the tension in the journals escalated as Eleanor described the increasing pressure she felt. She hinted at subtle threats, anonymous phone calls, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. It became clear that Eleanor had intended for these journals to be discovered, but only when the time was right, when the power dynamics in the town might have shifted, or when a new, uncompromised individual might finally stumble upon them. She knew the truth was dangerous, but she also knew it had to come out. The final entries spoke of her failing health, and a desperate plea for whoever found her writings to finish what I started. Clara looked at the old faded photographs of Thomas Davies that Eleanor had tucked into the journals, photographs of a younger, hopeful Thomas, before the town had broken him. The image was a stark reminder of the long, painful journey he had endured, all because of a truth no one would believe. The box was a time capsule, opening a window to a past that was not only unresolved but still very much alive. The shadow of Mr. Harrison's influence still lingering over the town. The question wasn't just what had happened, but who else was involved, and how deep did the conspiracy truly run. Clara knew, with a certainty that vibrated through her bones, that she couldn't let Eleanor's sacrifice, or Thomas's decades of unjustified suffering, be in vain. The journals were not just a diary. They were a roadmap to a truth that had been deliberately buried. Her first instinct was to go straight to the police, but the journals themselves warned against it. Eleanor's accounts of the local authorities' dismissiveness, and even hints of their complicity or extreme caution when dealing with Mr. Harrison, made Clara hesitate. She needed more than just the journals. She needed concrete, undeniable proof, something that would force open the closed eyes of the town and its institutions. Her investigation began subtly. She revisited the locations Eleanor had meticulously documented: the old abandoned warehouse near the docks, the secluded stretch of woods where Thomas had made his fateful discovery, and even the seemingly innocuous local diner where Harrison held court, always at the same booth. She found faint traces, barely perceptible marks, that corroborated Eleanor's descriptions: a discarded unique cigarette butt near the warehouse entrance, a specific type of tire track on the dirt path. Small details that, alone, meant nothing, but when combined with the journals, began to paint an increasingly clear and sinister picture. She even managed to track down old Mark, the journalist Eleanor had written about, now living a quiet, almost reclusive life in a town several states away. He was initially wary, his eyes holding the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. But when Clara mentioned Eleanor Vance in her journals, a flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps fear, ignited in his gaze. He didn't confirm everything outright, but his silence, his averted gaze when certain names came up, spoke volumes. He cautioned Clara, his voice barely a whisper: "Some secrets are best left buried, kid, for your own good." Meanwhile, Thomas Davies, now a frail old man, still carried the burden of his truth. Clara began visiting him, subtly at first, as a concerned neighbor. She listened to his stories, letting him recount the night, his observations, his frustrations. She never mentioned Eleanor's journals, not yet. She wanted to hear it directly from him, to see if his memories, however faded, aligned with the meticulous records of the deceased observer. And they did. The details, no matter how small, matched perfectly. The type of car, the number of figures, the exact time of night, it was all there, etching a stark contrast between his quiet persistence and the town's loud dismissal. Seeing the pain in his eyes, the deep-seated injustice that had warped his life, only strengthened Clara's resolve. The crucial turning point came when Clara found another, even more chilling piece of evidence within Eleanor's hidden compartment in the wooden chest. Tucked beneath the last journal, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was a small, tarnished locket. Inside, along with a faded photograph of the missing young man, was a tiny, intricately folded note. The note contained a single, cryptic address, and a date, months in the past, implying a scheduled exchange. It wasn't the date of Thomas's initial sighting, but a much later one, suggesting these activities were ongoing, perhaps even escalating. The locket and the note solidified Clara's conviction. This was not just about past injustices. The network Mr. Harrison had built was still active. Clara knew she couldn't confront Harrison directly. That would be reckless, and she'd likely end up dismissed, or worse. She needed an ally, someone with the courage and credibility to act on the information. Her thoughts turned to Silas, the old fisherman mentioned in Eleanor's journals. He was still alive, living by the lake, a weathered but sharpened man. She sought him out, cautiously approaching him, slowly building trust. When she finally revealed the journals and the locket, Silas's eyes widened, a grim understanding dawning on his face. He confirmed what Eleanor had hinted at, that he too had witnessed unsettling things, but had learned to keep silent for his own survival. But seeing Eleanor's meticulous notes, seeing the tangible evidence that corroborated his own fragmented memories, something shifted within him. He felt the weight of past regrets, the lives that might have been saved if he had been braver. Two of them, the young archivist and the old fisherman, formed an unlikely alliance. Their plan was risky, bordering on dangerous. They wouldn't go to the local authorities, not yet. Instead, they would gather undeniable real-time evidence of the next exchange hinted at by the locket's note. They would use technology Eleanor never had: hidden cameras, audio recorders, anything to capture the truth in its rawest form. The date on the note was fast approaching, just days away. Clara and Silas spent sleepless nights poring over maps, strategizing, anticipating every move. The tension was almost unbearable. They knew they were playing with fire, challenging a man who had built his empire on secrets and fear. The air thickened with anticipation, the quiet hum of their preparations punctuated by the ever-present question: would this finally be the moment the truth erupted, or would it be another desperate, futile attempt to expose a darkness that preferred to remain hidden? The day of the exchange arrived, cloaked in a thick, unseasonable fog that seemed to mirror the heavy tension in Clara and Silas's chests. They positioned themselves meticulously, Clara with a compact high-definition camera rigged to a pair of binoculars, and Silas, his weathered hands steady, operating a sensitive directional microphone. They were hidden deep within the undergrowth, just as Thomas had been decades ago, their hearts pounding in unison with the chilling realization of the risk they were taking. Every rustle of leaves, every distant siren, sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. This wasn't just about clearing Thomas's name anymore. It was about exposing a deeply entrenched criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for far too long. Fueled by the town's silence and Harrison's chilling influence, hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. Just as doubts began to creep in, a faint glint of headlights cut through the fog. Two vehicles, just as Eleanor's journals had described, pulled up to the secluded clearing. Stepped Mr. Harrison, his familiar, seemingly benevolent face now starkly illuminated by the car's beam, revealing a cold, calculating intensity Clara had only imagined. With him were two burly men, unfamiliar faces, and from the second vehicle, a third man emerged, carrying a heavily wrapped package. The exchange was swift, precise, almost clinical. Money changed hands, the package was transferred, and hushed words were exchanged. Too low for Clara's microphone to fully capture, but the body language was undeniable, a transaction of significant, illicit value. Clara's fingers trembled on the camera, every click a silent scream of vindication for Thomas. Silas, beside her, gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. They had it, the proof, the indisputable visual and auditory evidence that would finally bring Harrison's empire crashing down. But just as the vehicles began to pull away, a second vehicle, entirely unexpected, emerged from the deeper shadows of the woods. It wasn't a police car, nor was it another one of Harrison's associates. This was an unmarked van, moving with a predatory slowness. Clara and Silas exchanged a bewildered, then horrified glance. Before either of them could fully process this new threat, the van doors slid open, and several figures, clad in dark tactical gear, swarmed out. They moved with a chilling efficiency, not towards Harrison's departing vehicles, but directly towards Clara and Silas's hiding spot. It was a calculated ambush, almost as if their presence had been anticipated, or perhaps betrayed. Panic flared. How could they have been discovered? Had Harrison's network eyes everywhere? Or was there another player in this dangerous game, an unknown entity lurking in the shadows? As the figures closed in, Clara instinctively clutched the camera, protecting the precious evidence, while Silas, with a surprising surge of agility for his age, grabbed her arm. "Run," he whispered urgently, his voice raw with fear. scrambled through the undergrowth, the sounds of snapping twigs and heavy footsteps echoing behind them. The fog, once their cover, now became a disorienting trap. The pursuit was relentless, proving these weren't just common thugs, but trained individuals, their movements coordinated and precise. Just when they thought they might escape into the deeper woods, a voice, amplified and distorted, cut through the night. "Stop. We know who you are. Give us the recording." It wasn't Harrison's voice. It was a voice they didn't recognize, but one that radiated authority and a chilling sense of familiarity with their mission. This was no random encounter. This was a targeted operation. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything they could have imagined. They weren't just exposing a local criminal. They had stumbled into something far larger, something that had been meticulously concealed, and now they were caught between two formidable forces. The truth, Thomas's truth, was no longer just a personal vindication. It had become a dangerous, life-threatening commodity, and they, the accidental custodians of it, were now squarely in the crosshairs of an unknown enemy, their survival hanging precariously in the balance. The shouts grew louder, closer. Clara and Silas plunged deeper into the fog-shrouded woods, their breath ragged, the camera and microphone clutched like lifelines. They could hear the crackle of walkie-talkies, the low murmur of voices, and the distinct sound of snapping twigs as their pursuers gained ground. Just when they thought they were cornered, a small, barely visible opening in the dense foliage appeared, a narrow deer path. They dove into it, the thick undergrowth immediately concealing them. The sounds of pursuit momentarily faded, replaced by the thumping of their own hearts. They ran, not knowing where the path led, only that it was away from the immediate danger. Suddenly, the path opened into a small, dilapidated clearing. In the center stood an old, forgotten hunting cabin, its windows boarded up, its porch rotting. It was a place that reeked of abandonment, a perfect hideout. They slipped inside, pulling the creaky door shut behind them, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness. Moonlight filtered weakly through gaps in the boards, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. Outside, the search continued. They could hear the voices, closer, now, a chilling reminder of their precarious situation. Clara fumbled with the camera, quickly transferring the video and audio files to a secure cloud storage, a contingency plan Silas had insisted upon. "If we don't make it," he'd said, "the truth still has to get out." As the upload progressed, Bar slowly crept forward. A new sound cut through the tense silence outside, the wail of sirens, not just one, but several, growing louder, closer. The pursuers cursed, their voices laced with frustration, then scattered. The tactical team, whoever they were, had been intercepted. Relief washed over Clara and Silas, but it was the sirens stopped abruptly, and moments later the cabin door creaked open. They braced themselves, expecting the armed figures from the van. But standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the pale glow of the fog, was a figure they recognized, yet couldn't comprehend. It was Chief Miller, the head of their local police department, his face grim, his uniform crisp. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood two federal agents, their expressions unreadable. Chief Miller stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the dusty cabin, finally settling on Clara and Silas. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice devoid of its usual friendly cadence, "and Ms. Vance's niece, we've been looking for you." Clara felt a surge of indignation. "Looking for us? We just captured evidence that could expose Mr. Harrison's criminal network, evidence you've ignored for decades." The chief's eyes narrowed. "We know about the evidence, Ms. Vance. We've known for a while." And then came the final good twist. The federal agent stepped forward, holding up a file. "Mr. Harrison's activities have been under federal investigation for years. Our intelligence suggested he was moving into something bigger, something that crossed state lines. We've been building a case meticulously. That's why we allowed certain local operations to continue, to gather enough evidence for a complete takedown." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And Chief Miller here," he gestured to the chief, who now stood with a look of profound wariness, "has been our inside contact." Clara and Silas stared, utterly stunned. Chief Miller, the man who had dismissed Thomas's pleas, the man who had seemed indifferent to Harrison's rising power, had been working against him all along. "Thomas Davies' initial reports," the chief said, his voice quiet. "They weren't ignored. They were the very first pieces of the puzzle. We couldn't act immediately without tipping off Harrison. It was too risky. His influence was too vast, his network too deep. We needed overwhelming, undeniable proof, not just fragments. We needed to let him think he was untouchable." The full weight of the revelation settled on them. The years of Thomas's suffering, the town's unwavering belief in his lies, the very perception of justice. It had all been a carefully orchestrated, agonizingly slow game of patience and deception. The reason Eleanor Vance had kept her journals hidden, the true reason for Silas's reluctant silence, the journalist Mark's sudden disappearance. It wasn't fear of Harrison alone. It was the knowledge that an investigation was underway, and any premature action could jeopardize the entire operation, putting countless lives and the ultimate pursuit of justice at risk. Thomas's vindication wasn't going to come from their brave act tonight. but from a calculated long-term strategy that had been unfolding in the shadows for decades. The man they believed had been a victim of their failure was, in fact, the unintentional catalyst for their long-awaited triumph. The true climax wasn't just catching Harrison. It was the shattering realization that the truth had been an ally all along, just working on a much longer, more intricate timeline than anyone could have ever imagined. The air in the small, dusty cabin hung thick with the weight of revelation. Clara and Silas, still reeling from the shocking truth of Chief Miller's involvement, could only stare as the federal agents calmly explained the intricate web of the long-term investigation. It wasn't just about Mr. Harrison. His network stretched far beyond their quiet town, touching on illicit dealings that spanned multiple states and even crossed international borders. Thomas's initial lies had merely been the first thread in a massive, tangled knot that had taken decades to meticulously unravel. The unmarked van that had pursued them, that was a federal tactical team, tasked with securing the evidence, Clara and Silas had unwittingly captured, ensuring it didn't fall into the wrong hands, a subtle move to protect the integrity of the operation. Chief Miller, his shoulders slumped, finally explained the immense burden he had carried. Every time Thomas came to him, every time the town whispered about his supposed delusion, it had torn at the chief. He couldn't validate Thomas's claims without jeopardizing the entire, fragile investigation. He had to play the part of the dismissive, local authority, knowing that a deeper, far more significant justice was at stake. "It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do," he confessed, his voice heavy with years of suppressed guilt and strategic silence. "To watch a good man suffer like that, knowing I couldn't help him directly. But we needed Harrison to feel safe, to get careless. We needed to catch him in the act, with undeniable proof." The federal agents confirmed that the evidence Clara and Silas had recorded that night, combined with Eleanor Vance's meticulous journals and Silas's own quiet observations, was the final piece they needed. The criminal enterprise was exposed. Within days, the news broke like a dam, flooding the town with a truth far more astonishing than any rumor. Mr. Harrison, the seemingly benevolent community leader, was arrested along with dozens of his associates, implicated in a vast scheme of money laundering, smuggling, and other serious offenses. The missing person from years ago, the young man Eleanor had hinted about, his fate was also uncovered, directly linked to Harrison's fear of exposure. Justice, though long delayed, was finally served, not just for Thomas, but for all those wronged by Harrison's shadowy empire. The town, once quick to condemn Thomas, was now quick to apologize. The whispers had vanished, replaced by a wave of profound shame and belated admiration. People sought out Thomas, offering tearful apologies, attempting to reconcile for decades of Thomas, now frail but with a newfound serenity, accepted their apologies with quiet dignity. He didn't gloat, he didn't demand vindication. The simple fact that the truth had finally emerged was enough. His reputation was not just restored, it was elevated to that of a quiet hero, a man who had stood firm in his conviction against overwhelming odds. Clara, the accidental catalyst, found herself thrust into the local spotlight. She helped transcribe Eleanor's journals for the federal case, and shared parts of the incredible story, emphasizing her aunt's quiet courage and Thomas's unwavering spirit. Silas, the stoic fisherman, finally found his voice, sharing his own experiences and insights, adding another layer to the community's understanding of the long-hidden darkness. The old cabin where Clara and Silas had hidden that night eventually, it became a symbolic landmark, a reminder of the hidden truths and the unseen battles fought for justice. The story of Thomas Davies became a powerful local legend, a testament to the enduring power of truth no matter how long it takes to surface. It taught the town a profound lesson about the dangers of prejudgment, the importance of listening, and the often unseen forces at play beneath the surface of everyday life. And for Clara, it was a deeply personal journey of discovery, not just of her aunt's secret life, but of the strength of conviction, the slow burn of justice, and the quiet heroism found in the most unexpected places. The silence that had once defined Thomas's life was finally, beautifully, broken.